It was just another evening at the local park, the sun setting with its golden light casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I had just finished playing basketball with some of my friends and was heading back home. My mind was still on the game, replaying a move I'd made in my head, trying to perfect it for next time. Then, out of nowhere, a cop car screeched to a halt next to me. Two officers stepped out, one of them a large guy with a deep frown and the other tall and thin, both in full uniform. They didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring me down like they were waiting for something. My heart rate picked up as the silence stretched on. "Hey, you!" The larger officer barked, his voice like a whip. "What are you doing around here?" Confused, I glanced around the empty park. "Just heading home, sir. I just finished playing." "You know you fit the description of someone we're looking for," the other officer added, looking at his partner, then back to me. "Where are you headed?" "I'm just going home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But they weren't convinced. The large officer stepped closer. "You don't look like someone who belongs here." At that, I froze. I knew what this was. They'd made up their minds already. Without another word, the officer grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully behind my back. "Let go." "What are you doing?" I shouted, my pulse racing. "Shut up and stay still," the officer growled, his grip tightening. "Please, I'm just trying to get home," I pleaded, but they weren't listening. They started to push me toward their patrol car. The adrenaline rushed through me, my mind scrambling for a way out. This was wrong, this was all wrong, but what could I do? They were bigger, stronger, and in control. I felt my world shrinking as they shoved me into the back seat. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard the loud sound of my phone ringing in my pocket. The sound of my phone ringing seemed to echo in the silence of the car. It wasn't just any call, it was his call. My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly who was on the other end. "Answer it," the tall officer said, glancing back at me, still holding my wrist. His tone was harsh, but there was a hint of hesitation. He wasn't sure if he should let me answer, but something about the situation made him uncomfortable. I could barely catch my breath as I fumbled with my phone, the screen lighting up with my dad's name. My father was the Attorney General, one of the most powerful figures in the state. I knew this moment could either make everything stop or escalate things in ways I couldn't even imagine. I slid the screen to answer, still trying to steady my hands. "Dad?" I said, my voice cracking with tension. "Where are you, son?" My dad's voice came through clearly, but there was something different in it, calm, measured, but with an edge that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm at the park. I don't know what's going on." They just grabbed me," said I fit some description. "They're taking me to the car now. I swear, I didn't do anything wrong." There was a pause, then a low sigh from my father. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to stay calm, all right? I'm going to take care of this. Do not let them take you anywhere unless I say so." His words, though calm, carried weight. The officers must have heard the authority in his voice because they stopped in their tracks, their hands still holding me but the tension now noticeable. The tall officer glanced nervously at his partner, who was still in the front seat. "We're just doing our job here," the larger officer muttered, but I could tell the unease was creeping into his voice. My father spoke again, and this time his tone was different, authoritative, unyielding. "You are to release my son immediately. I don't care what description you think he matches. I'm on my way to the station now. I suggest you do exactly as I say, or you will regret it." The change was immediate. The officer's grip on me loosened, but he didn't let go entirely. "Sir, we're just following protocol," the tall officer stammered, but my father interrupted him with a cold finality. "I don't care about your protocol. You've made a mistake, and you're going to correct it now." There was a long silence in the car, the officers unsure of what to do next. The larger officer gave a nervous glance at his partner, who nodded slightly. I could feel the tension crackling in the air. It was clear they realized they were in way over their heads. Then, the large officer spoke again, his voice quieter this time. We'll release him now. But my dad wasn't done. Good. And don't ever lay a hand on my son again. I could hear the sound of my father's office door opening, then a few quiet words being exchanged. His footsteps echoed in the background. I could almost picture him striding with that same confidence that had earned him respect, and fear, in equal measure. As the officer released my arm, I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain, these officers had messed with the wrong team. The officers reluctantly opened the door to let me out of the patrol car. I stepped out slowly, my legs shaky, but my head held high. My phone was still pressed to my ear, and my father's voice was like an anchor pulling me back from the chaos. Stay where you are, son. I'm on my way. Don't say anything else to them. I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see me. The officers didn't dare make a move as I stood there, glaring at them. The silence felt thick, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. Then, without warning, the larger officer muttered, "We're sorry, kid. Just take care of yourself, all right?" But I wasn't listening to apologies anymore. My father's presence was looming, even though he wasn't physically here. There was no way I was letting them think they could just walk away from this. I could feel the heat of anger simmering beneath the surface, but I kept it in check. They hadn't just messed with me, they'd messed with someone who had the power to expose everything. And my father didn't take those kinds of mistakes lightly. As I stood there, my dad's words echoed in my mind. Do not let them take you anywhere unless I say so. It was clear he knew what would happen if I'd been taken to the station. But now that I was free, I could see the fear in the officers' eyes. They had messed with someone who was untouchable. I turned to the officers. You messed up, I said, my voice steady and unshaken. And you're going to wish you hadn't. Before they could respond, I heard the distinct sound of my father's voice cutting through the air like a blade. His car pulled up with a screech, the tires leaving marks on the pavement. The officers went rigid, recognizing him immediately. The door slammed shut as my father stormed out, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was dressed in a sharp suit, looking every bit the powerful figure he was. The officers shifted uncomfortably, the tension in the air now palpable. Step aside, my father ordered, his voice low but demanding. The officers didn't dare argue. They moved away, giving him space to approach. He stood in front of me, eyes scanning me briefly to make sure I was okay, then turned his full attention to the officers. The look he gave them sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the look of an angry father, it was the look of someone who could dismantle their careers with a single word. Do you have any idea who you've just detained? He asked, his voice calm, but the words felt like they were dripping with venom. One of the officers stammered, clearly trying to justify himself. Sir, we thought. No, my father interrupted, his voice cold as ice. You didn't think, you assumed. And in doing so, you made the mistake of messing with my family. The officers were visibly shrinking under his gaze, and I could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't just any family. This was the family of the Attorney General. My son, my father continued, will not be harassed again. Understand? The larger officer took a step back, his face pale. Yes, sir. We understand. You're damn right you do, my father replied. You will report this immediately to your superior, and you will ensure it never happens again. If there are any further issues, I'll be the one handling them from here on out. The officers nodded quickly, no words left to say. The tension was thick, but the power shift had already happened. They had no idea what they had just done, and they were far from ready for the consequences. My father turned to me, his expression softening as he stepped forward. You all right, son? I nodded, trying to shake off the last of the adrenaline. Yeah, I'm fine. Just, a little shaken up. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It's over now. But it's important you know something. He paused, looking back at the officers one last time. People will try to judge you based on nothing but assumptions. Never let them win. You hold your ground. I looked at him, taking in his words. I knew this wasn't just about tonight, it was about every fight, every unfair situation, and every time someone would try to hold me down because of who I was. But now, it was my turn to stand tall. Let's go home, my father said, his voice warm again. And as we walked toward the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. This wasn't just a moment of justice, it was a warning. And I had a feeling the officers knew it too. We drove home in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over me. My father's presence in the car was both comforting and intimidating. I could sense he was holding something back, but I wasn't about to push him to talk about it yet. He'd deal with this in his own way. The house felt different when we walked in. It wasn't just the usual quiet, it was heavier, like everything was waiting for something. My mother, who'd been in the kitchen, looked up when she saw us enter. The moment her eyes landed on me, she rushed over, her expression filled with concern. What happened? She asked, her voice laced with worry as she looked between me and my father. He's fine, my dad said quickly, holding up a hand. But we need to talk. I nodded, sitting down at the kitchen table, still trying to process everything. My mother sat across from me, her eyes soft but serious. Are you sure you're okay? She asked again, her voice gentle. I'm fine, I reassured her, though my hands were still shaking slightly. It happened so fast. 1 minute, I'm walking home, and the next, they're pulling me into the car. My dad, who had been standing at the counter, turned to face us. It's over now, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. But I want you both to understand something. This isn't just a one-off situation. These kinds of mistakes, they happen all the time. But they don't have to happen to us. I glanced up at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't just talking about the incident tonight. He was talking about a much bigger issue. It's not just the police, my father continued, pacing slowly. It's the way people make judgments based on what they think they know. Based on assumptions, based on their biases. The moment they decided to question you, they weren't thinking about you, they were thinking about a stereotype. I felt my stomach churn. It wasn't just the cops. It was everyone. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression unwavering. I'm going to make sure this never happens again. To you, to anyone. I'm filing complaints, and I'll make sure they answer for this. They need to understand that their actions have consequences. My mother shook her head slightly. You can't just make them feel bad about it. This is more than just a lesson for them. I know, my dad said, his voice dropping. This is about power, control, and justice. And it's not just about fixing their mistake, it's about ensuring they never forget the lesson. I sat back in my chair, the full gravity of what he was saying finally hitting me. I'd known my father was powerful, everyone knew that. But I never realized how deep his commitment to justice really ran. It wasn't just about making things right in a single case, it was about making sure the system changed. We'll have to be careful, my dad said, looking at both of us. This won't be easy. There will be people who won't like the attention this draws. But the truth is, the system is broken in ways we can't ignore anymore. Not for 1 minute. I nodded slowly, realizing he wasn't just talking about tonight, or even just about me. He was talking about everything. All the times people like us were mistreated or misjudged. All the quiet injustices that never made the news. This was his fight, and now it was mine too. I'll do whatever I can to help, I said, my voice steady. My father gave me a rare smile, proud, yet full of determination. "I know you will, son. I know you will." The conversation ended there, but something in the air shifted. It wasn't just about what had happened to me anymore, it was about something larger. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just my father's son. I was part of this fight now too. And nothing was going to stop us from making things right. The days that followed were a blur. At first, it seemed like everything would return to normal, but I soon realized that wasn't going to happen. My father's calls and meetings grew more frequent. News outlets began sniffing around the story, and suddenly, what had been a small, personal incident turned into something much bigger. It wasn't long before I was summoned to speak with my father's team. They needed a statement from me, a formal account of what had happened at the park. My mother sat beside me as I recounted every detail of the encounter, leaving nothing out, not even the smallest glance or word that had been said. The team of lawyers, advisors, and investigators all listened intently, scribbling notes, nodding when necessary. My father, of course, wasn't far from the action, his presence felt even when he wasn't in the room. Once the meeting was over, I was left with an uncomfortable feeling of being part of something much larger than I had ever anticipated. I wasn't just the kid who got grabbed by the police anymore, I was the catalyst. This wasn't going to be a quiet affair, and I knew it. There was no going back now. It didn't take long for the press to catch on. I started seeing headlines pop up online. "Teen detained by police, father is the Attorney General." The story gained traction, spreading across social media, with people weighing in from every direction. Most supported me, but there were also those who tried to spin the story, questioning my version of events, trying to paint me as some kind of troublemaker. They even tried to discredit my father, suggesting he was overreacting. But my father never wavered. Every interview, every press release, every public statement was carefully crafted. He had handled political storms before, but this was different. This wasn't about winning a case or gaining a vote, it was about something far more personal, and he made sure to drive that point home. As the media circus grew, so did the pressure. I could feel the weight of the attention on my shoulders, a constant reminder that everything I did, everything I said, would be scrutinized. I couldn't walk down the street without someone recognizing me. Some would offer a sympathetic smile, others would look at me like I was a target. The burden was heavy. But the hardest part wasn't the public eye, it was the call I got one evening, late, after the media frenzy had died down for the night. I answered the phone with a nervous knot in my stomach. "Hello?" I said, still unsure who was calling. "This is Detective Larson with the department. I need to speak with you regarding the incident last week," the voice on the other end said. My throat tightened. "What is this about?" "I can't go into too many details right now. But we've opened an internal investigation into the officers involved. We need to ask you a few more questions." I felt my pulse quicken. My father had warned me that things would escalate, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. "When can I expect to hear from you again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "We'll be in touch soon," the detective said, and then the line went dead. I hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. This wasn't just a matter of correcting a wrong anymore. It was spiraling into something larger than any of us had anticipated. And while I knew my father would fight for justice, a small part of me felt uneasy. I could sense that something was brewing, something far more dangerous than I had imagined. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. My father's words echoed in my head, a reminder of the stakes involved. "People will try to judge you based on nothing but assumptions," he had said. "Never let them win." I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. But I also knew that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The days that followed that phone call felt like they moved in slow motion. Each conversation, each meeting, each document my father handed me carried more weight than the last. The internal investigation into the officers had officially begun, and the department was trying to cover its tracks. But my father, with his connections and authority, was already a few steps ahead of them. One evening, after dinner, my father called me into his study. The dim light of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the room as he sat behind his desk, flipping through a stack of papers. His face was hard to read, but I could see the deep lines around his eyes, lines that spoke of the pressure he was under. "Sit down," he said, his voice low but firm. I took the seat across from him, nervous about what was coming next. "Things are moving faster than I anticipated," he said, setting the papers aside. "The department's investigating, but I'm not convinced they're being as thorough as they should. They're going to try to sweep this under the rug." I looked at him, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What's the next step?" My father leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "I need you to testify. You're going to be the one to push this forward. Without your statement, we won't have the leverage we need. We need this to go public, son." My heart skipped a beat. Public? Testifying meant putting myself under even more scrutiny, opening myself up to the full force of the department, and the media. The pressure would only get worse. But I could see in my father's eyes that there was no backing down now. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he added, his tone softer now. "But you're the key to making sure this doesn't go unnoticed. We're going to make sure this never happens again." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on my chest. There was no going back. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Let's do this." My father nodded, his expression unreadable but approving. "I knew you would be. But you need to understand one thing, this won't be easy. They will try to discredit you. They will try to tear you down. But you have to stay strong. This is about more than just what happened that night. It's about sending a message to everyone who thinks they can get away with this." I nodded, my resolve hardening. The thought of letting these officers walk away without consequences was unbearable. The system needed to change, and if my story could help that happen, would do whatever it took. The next few days felt like a blur. My father's legal team prepared me for the testimony, coaching me on how to stay calm, how to answer questions without hesitation, how to make sure my words couldn't be twisted. They even helped me rehearse, guiding me through the exact details of that night so I wouldn't forget anything under pressure. But the real test came when we walked into the courthouse. The press was waiting outside, cameras flashing as my father and I stepped out of the car. Reporters shouted questions, trying to get a statement, but my father's presence was enough to keep them at bay. He led me past the throng of journalists and into the building, the weight of everyone's eyes on us. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My father's reputation preceded him, but this was still unfamiliar territory for me. I had never been in a room like this before. The officials, the lawyers, and even the officers who had been involved were all there. The air felt suffocating, but I knew I couldn't back down now. When it was my turn to take the stand, my heart pounded in my chest. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. But as I stepped up to the podium, I remembered what my father had told me. This wasn't just about me, it was about everyone who had been treated unfairly. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. And when I began to speak, I didn't just recount what happened that night, I spoke about the bigger picture. The assumptions, the biases, and the injustices that were allowed to fester. I spoke about how it wasn't just a case of a few bad officers, it was a symptom of a much larger problem. When I finished, the room was silent. I couldn't tell if it was shock or something else, but I knew one thing for sure, I had made my point. My father was proud, I could see it in his eyes, but I also saw the weight of the battle ahead of us. This was far from over. The department wouldn't let this go easily. But I knew we had taken the first step towards something bigger, something that could change the system. And no matter what happened next, I wouldn't let them forget my story. After my testimony, things got complicated. The media coverage went into overdrive, and the case became a national story. Every outlet was covering it. Some praised my courage for standing up, while others twisted my words, questioning my intentions. Social media exploded with both support and backlash. I saw it all: tweets, memes, heated arguments in comment sections. Some people praised me as a hero, a symbol of change, while others accused me of playing the victim for attention. The hate was palpable, but what hurt the most was seeing people dismissing my story outright, questioning whether it was really as bad as I made it sound. But the hardest part? The phone calls that came in the middle of the night. The anonymous ones. "You're making a big mistake, kid," a deep voice said one evening, his words low and threatening. "You think your father can protect you forever? You're just digging your own grave." I didn't recognize the number, but the threat in his voice was clear. My first instinct was to tell my dad, but I knew better. This wasn't something I could run to him for every time it happened. He was already fighting a much bigger battle. Over the next few days, the pressure only grew. There were phone calls, and then there were strange cars parked outside our house. My dad's security detail became more visible, and for the first time, I understood the weight of the position my father held. He wasn't just my dad anymore, he was the Attorney General, and his family was always under a microscope. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. It was late, too late for any kind of normal visit. My father stood up immediately, his eyes narrowing as he exchanged a glance with my mother. "Stay here," he said to me, his voice low, sharp. I nodded, watching him through the kitchen window as he approached the door, flanked by two security officers. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the way his body stiffened. Whoever it wasn't a friendly visit. A few minutes later, my father came back inside, his expression unreadable. "I need you to pack a bag," he said. "We're going to stay at a safe location for a while." I felt my stomach drop. "What happened?" "Nothing for you to worry about," he said quickly, though his eyes said otherwise. "Just get your things together. We'll talk in the morning." That night, we left. My father, my mother, and I, all packed into the car, heading to a place I had never seen before. It was a remote property, far from the city, and had been kept off the grid. We stayed there for the next few days, isolated from the world. It was surreal. I could feel the constant tension hanging in the air. My parents barely spoke, always keeping their distance. I couldn't escape the feeling that we were being watched, that we were on the verge of something much darker. During those days, my father would go out, speaking to his contacts, making calls, doing what needed to be done. He made sure I stayed out of sight, staying in the house while he handled everything. I didn't understand the full scope of it all, but I could feel the pressure mounting, like we were all on the edge of something we couldn't control. One afternoon, as I sat in the house, trying to get my mind off things, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father: "We need to talk. Meet me at the barn in 10 minutes. I didn't question it. I left the house, walking down a long path toward the barn. The cool air was still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my feet. When I got there, my father was waiting. His expression was darker than I had ever seen it. "Sit down," he said. I did, and he took a deep breath, looking me in the eyes. "This has gone further than we expected. The officers involved, they're digging in. They're trying to make this go away, trying to paint us as the problem. But we can't let them. We have to expose the truth." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "The department is trying to discredit everything you said. They're pushing hard to make you look like a liar. They've even been going after witnesses, trying to intimidate them into changing their statements." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling in. This wasn't just about the officers anymore. This was about a battle for control. They were using every trick in the book to silence the truth, and it was clear they weren't going to stop until they had erased every trace of what happened that night. "You've got a choice, son," my father continued. "You can either let them win, or you can keep pushing. But it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better." I felt my pulse quicken. There was no going back now. My father had already made his decision, and I couldn't back down either. We had to fight for what was right. "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "We finish this." My father gave me a sharp nod. "Good. Because this is far from over. But now we need to make sure everyone hears the truth." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about something much bigger, something that could change the system for good. And no matter what it took, we were going to make sure it happened. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of strategy, media blitzes, and legal maneuvering. My father and his team were relentless. The officers involved, their superiors, and even the department's internal affairs division were all under scrutiny. The case was slowly gaining national attention, with protests popping up in several cities, demanding accountability. But with the heightened attention came even more danger. I began receiving more threats that were less veiled and more direct. Some were on the phone, others in the form of anonymous letters slipped under our door. But the most chilling one arrived on a random afternoon, when a small package appeared on our doorstep. Inside was a photo, a grainy picture of me walking home from the park, with a message scrawled across the back: "You should have stayed quiet, kid." That was the moment I realized we weren't just fighting for justice. We were fighting for our safety, our lives. The system that had let this happen to me was now fully aware that we were challenging it, and it didn't take kindly to that. At my father's insistence, we moved again, this time to a more secure location, a place no one knew about. My father wasn't taking any chances. The safe houses were fortified, with security on constant patrol, but it wasn't just the physical danger that weighed on me. It was the fear of what the department would do next. I spent most of my time at the new house, cut off from the world, while my father continued to work tirelessly behind the scenes. He was meeting with the media, negotiating with politicians, and ensuring that the investigation wouldn't be swept under the rug. His power, his authority, was being put to the test like never before. And yet, despite everything, I could see the toll it was taking on him. His face had grown more drawn, his steps more deliberate. The stress of it all was clear, but he never showed it to the public. To them, he was still the fearless leader. But at home, I saw the cracks. One night, as we sat down to dinner, my father looked at me with a kind of weariness in his eyes. "I never wanted this for you," he said quietly. "This whole thing, it wasn't supposed to be your fight." "But it is now," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "It's all of our fight." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of my words had finally settled in. "I've spent my entire career fighting to change things from the inside. I always thought I could protect you from this. But now I see that, it's not enough. The system is broken, son. You're right to challenge it." I sat there, the weight of his admission sinking in. It wasn't just about the two of us anymore. It was about everyone who had been unjustly treated, everyone who had been pushed aside. We were a part of something much bigger than just one incident. The next morning, things changed again. A bombshell dropped in the media: internal emails had been leaked from within the department. The officers involved in my case had been discussing ways to discredit me, to make my testimony seem unreliable. They had even planted false information in the department's reports, fabricating evidence to cover their tracks. It was a game changer. The story spread like wildfire. The leaks revealed not only the officers' corruption but a wider conspiracy within the department to protect their own, no matter the cost. What had been a simple case of misconduct had turned into a full-blown scandal, implicating not just the officers but also high-ranking officials who had been complicit in covering up their actions. Suddenly, the department was on the defensive, and the pressure mounted. Investigations into corruption spread through the ranks, and more officials were implicated. The public outcry reached a fever pitch, demanding accountability at every level. The calls for resignations came fast, and the pressure on the department was unbearable. For the first time since this had started, I felt a sense of hope. We were making progress. We were breaking through. But that didn't mean the fight was over. It was only just beginning. One evening, as the headlines continued to spread, my father called me into his study. The look on his face was grim. "They're coming for us, son," he said quietly. "The department won't back down easily. They'll try to discredit us, to intimidate us, but we can't let them win." I could feel the gravity of his words. This wasn't just a political fight anymore. This was personal. And they weren't going to let us walk away from it without a fight. "Are you ready for this?" my father asked, looking me in the eyes. I nodded. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now." And with that, we prepared ourselves for the next stage of the battle, because no matter what they threw at us, we were in it for the long haul. The reckoning had only just begun. The storm had been building for months, but now it felt like it was at its peak. The scandal had gone from an isolated incident to a full-blown crisis. The department was in chaos, its credibility in shambles, and the public was demanding accountability. My father had become the focal point of this fight, and every decision he made felt like it could tip the scales either way. But no matter how dire things got, one thing was clear: he wasn't backing down. And neither was I. The final hearing was set. It wasn't just about the two officers who had harassed me anymore. It was about every person who had been treated unjustly, every case that had been ignored, every officer who had gotten away with misconduct for far too long. The room in the courthouse was packed with reporters, activists, and even the families of others who had suffered at the hands of the police. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. As we walked into the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel the weight of every eye on us. The officers who had been involved sat near the back, their faces pale and nervous. The department's lawyers were already in position, ready to defend the indefensible. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had my truth, and nothing was going to take that away from me. My father stood beside me, his presence commanding, as always. He didn't speak, but I could see the fire in his eyes. This wasn't just about the law for him. This was about making sure the truth was heard, no matter the cost. The judge called the session to order, and the air in the room thickened. It was time. One by one, the witnesses took the stand, each one telling their version of events. But when it was finally my turn, the room fell silent. I stood up slowly, taking a deep breath before I made my way to the witness stand. Every step felt like it was leading me into a new chapter of my life. This was the moment. The moment where I would speak not just for myself, but for everyone who had been wronged by a system that was supposed to protect them. I took the oath, my voice steady as I swore to tell the truth. As I looked out over the crowd, I saw faces of support, faces that had stood by me through it all. But I also saw the officers, sweating, avoiding eye contact. They knew this was the moment when their lies were about to be exposed. And I was ready to bring it all to light. I began by recounting that night at the park, the way the officers had treated me, the way they had judged me without cause. I didn't just tell the story of what happened, I told the story of what shouldn't have happened. I spoke about the assumptions, the profiling, the way the system had failed me. But I didn't stop there. I spoke about what this case meant for all the others who had faced similar injustices, the ones whose voices had been silenced or ignored. The room was still. Every word I spoke seemed to hang in the air, carrying the weight of all those who had come before me. When I finished, I looked directly at the officers who had harassed me, their faces now flushed with embarrassment. They couldn't meet my gaze. I knew I had won. The defense tried to discredit me, of course. They questioned my memory, twisted my words, but it didn't matter. My story had been told. The truth had been laid bare. And it wasn't just my words, there were documents, recordings, and testimonies that backed up everything I had said. The officers could no longer hide behind their lies. The judge took his time deliberating, but everyone knew how this would end. It wasn't just about the officers anymore. It was about the entire department, about the system that had allowed this to happen, and about the consequences that would now unfold. Finally, the judge returned with his ruling. The officers were guilty of misconduct, and their actions had led to a larger investigation into corruption within the department. They were not only dismissed but also faced criminal charges. The department was forced to implement sweeping reforms, and the internal investigation that had been initiated months ago was now a full-blown overhaul. It was a victory, but it was also the beginning of a long road to real change. My father stood beside me as the room erupted in applause. But it wasn't just for me. It was for every person who had been wronged, every person who had been ignored, and for everyone who believed that justice could still be fought for. As we left the courthouse, the weight of the moment hit me. This was the change we had fought for. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But we had made it clear, no one would ever be silenced again. The world had heard us. And nothing would be the same.